I really am honest when I say I am excited about giving this course. And it came home to me when I flew in the other night, and I was sitting up in the room. They put me up on the fourth floor across the street, and I was looking out across this scene, which is basically Studio B, I guess, and Creative Live offices, and then Amazon towers in the background. And I realized something. I just had one of those moments. It was that landscape photography has really changed since I started. When I started, there were probably a handful of people that were out there making a living at photography and landscape. And we had heard of Ansel Adams, and many people knew of him, but when I was going to school, for example, when I started this career, there wasn't even a hint that you could make a living at landscape photography. It wasn't even cool or hip. So nowadays, it's completely changed, 180 degrees. Here we are, sitting in a studio in the middle of Seattle, talking about my favorite subject, landscape photography, for 2 days. So not only that, but it's taken on the interest of our youth, and so the social networks are alive with millions of pictures, literally millions of great pictures. So it's really an honor that, and I feel good and excited that I actually chose this career and that I'm still doing it and now teaching landscape photography. So also, in addition, I want to say that it's really the best time. Right now is the best time to be a landscape photographer. Believe it or not, it sounds like there's tragedy after tragedy in the world. We know what happened yesterday overseas, and there's always some kind of disease in some other country. But the reality is, if you look through history books, there's always going to be people doing that to themselves and others. And what we have to look at is our opportunities right now today. And so for a couple of reasons, travel's really accessible to these other countries. Other countries and cultures want the tourist dollar. Look at what's happening to Cuba, for example. Now you can get into Cuba, and we're going to be going on trips there. I'm going to be giving workshops there, and other people are going to be seeing Cuba. But there are many other countries around the world that are similar. So it's a great time to travel. In addition, it's a great time to buy equipment. Never before has equipment been so incredibly technical, but also beautiful. They have some of the best equipment now that you could ever imagine. When I started, it was film, and there was a 4x5 and a 35 millimeter. There were a couple other options, but basically there wasn't the options that we have now to make the quality of the images. You could take a 3, 4, or 5-year-old camera now, and you shouldn't have any excuse to make a beautiful picture. We have lots of excuses, but that shouldn't be one of them. And then also, the internet. The internet has changed everybody's ability to get what they've created out to the world. So this is really important for most of us who are not being paid to photograph. We just want to take pictures for several different reasons, whatever they are. We want to share them to the world, and that was not possible 20 years ago. So again, today, right now, is probably the best time ever that we've had for landscape photography. So if you think it was better in the old days, well, I'll tell you a few stories about what I was inspired by, but in addition, I want you to know today is a good opportunity to take on landscape photography. So what's in this class? Well, it's a whole lot of information in 2 days. And I've compiled it over stories, and I'll talk about the nature in landscape photography. I'll also talk about finding your eye, because I think that's probably the biggest question that everybody has, is how are you going to communicate something that's unique and special with the rest of your audience? In addition, I'm going to be talking about, of course, can't miss, composition, and we have camera techniques. I can't leave out camera techniques, so I'm going to teach you a lot of the things that I do in the field. And in addition, at the end, I'll do post-processing. So specifically, though, day one, I'm going to talk about finding your eye for a little while this morning. And then I'm also going to go and talk about the technical, let me go back one. I'm going to talk about the creative trinity, and that's subject, light, and composition, and how they relate to each other and are interrelated. And then scale. Scale I love. It's a great way of trying to put together some of the drama that we see in the landscape. And so I'm going to give you quite a few tips on how to use scale. In addition, I want to talk about timing specifically because, there's a lot of time in the day, and it's not just about sunrise and sunset. There's 24 hours. And so I want to show you the benefits of using different times throughout the clock. And that one's kind of two-part. The second part is really your timing is critical as well. There's certain moments when you only have seconds. You have to be ready for that and seize the moment, as they say. In addition to timing, then I'm going to talk about the technical trinity. And this I'm going to do right after lunch. You've just had some food, so you can come in and look at all the technical information, and I'll try to keep you awake with that, because really in the end, you have to know this stuff. Otherwise, it's more difficult to get to the good stuff, the creative stuff. So I want you to know how I approach those issues, and I want to share them with you, because there's certain specifics that make these technical issues a lot simpler than they might seem to be. And hopefully that's what I get across. And then focus. Focus sounds really simple, but with some of these cameras these days, there are many ways to focus. And I want to show you how I focus, specifically for landscapes. And in addition to how I focus when I'm photographing like birds in flight and some of the nature scenes that I do, or wildlife scenes. And also, I'm going to leave today at the end with composition, because that is one of the key elements of landscape photography, of all of photography. So I really want to spend some time discussing the finer points and give you guys some other considerations that you can take with you out into the field to use for composition. Day 2, I'm going to talk about the techniques in the field. So we'll go out and start looking at lenses I use, and specifically ways that I use the camera combination with certain lenses and some of the other devices I'm going to show you today. And then I'm going to talk about scouting, which I think is an important element all by itself. And I want to show you some of the benefits that have helped me so much when I go out and just simply scout. And that's different than when I'm trying to find pictures. Bracketing. Bracketing is something that comes up. It's basically, I call it bracketing and more, but it's HDR. How do you combine those bracketed files? And also, how do you take and capture those bracketing files, the accurate ones that you'll be able to use for the HDR software programs? So I want to give you specifics about how I do that and some other alternate methods as well. The creative lens. Creative lens is a lot of fun. It's basically, you have so many lenses you can buy, and we love buying lenses. But the reality is you can take one lens and turn it into just about any focal length you want, especially if you start with a longer one. So I'm going to show you some of my tips and techniques, I guess, and how I use certain lenses to turn it into different focal lengths. All right? And then I have the creative camera tricks. And those are just fun things that I've picked up over the years. I didn't think of all of them. Some of these were inspired by some of the students that have been with me on trips to crazy places and just watching them do crazy things. So it's a lot of fun to experiment with the camera. Day 2, the rest of it then, this is about the second half of day 2, is going to be post-processing. So I'm going to talk to you guys about one of the key elements, which is editing. I think editing is a big part of taking pictures. Now, some commercial photographers I know that basically take their pictures and send it off to the lab or some other editors, and it's gone. I did that for a while in commercial photography, but I think that in the end, if you're responsible for the work you're doing and you're excited about the work you're doing, editing is a big part. So I want to encourage you and show you some ways to spend more time behind the computer, believe it or not. How much is too much? I want to show you some of the things that I utilize and some of the concepts I think of when I'm looking at my pictures and realizing that I've gone too far, and some of the ethical concerns about that as well. But it's easy to go too far, so we all like excitement and color and contrast. And then I'll go through the basic panel in Lightroom and some of the considerations for white balance and color, because that's what we're going to be working in most of the time. Regional dynamics, and that is really concentrating on those masks that they have inside Lightroom, because that's where a lot of the magic happens. And I'll be spending quite a bit of time showing you different examples of how those masks work, how I use the masks, and in addition, how hopefully you can. Beyond Lightroom, so that's where we're going to get into the way I combine some of those bracketed files, and I'm going to show you how to combine it in a real easy way so that it doesn't look garish or the traditional HDR-ish method. All right? And then at the end of day 2, I want to go into manual blending, because this is something that I've used over the years that has really made a difference in my work in keeping it real. And so it's a little bit more technical. It's not a super advanced technique, though. I think it's overlooked in many cases because you have to use layers in Photoshop, but it's simpler than you think. There's a few steps. I'm going to give you those steps, and then you'll be able to take that with you and hopefully create more real images that are magical. So, on with some talking about pictures and concepts. Kind of a funny story. Years ago, my wife and I decided that, we hadn't been, at the time our kids were probably 5 or 6 or something, and we decided we hadn't really taken the family vacation. So we decided to rent some RVs, and we decided that we'd do this with another family. They had some other kids about the same age, and so we planned this little tour of the Southwest, all the places I had been and was familiar with, and they had, I guess, three boys, so we went through Vegas. We had to see Vegas. And then we went out into Zion, Bryce, and then on around to Lake Powell, and then finally, the big final moment of the trip was to go see the Grand Canyon. So we go through the whole trip, we're talking about it, how exciting it's going to be and to see the canyon, and I know the parents had really not seen the canyon either, so they were excited about it, and I was excited to show them. And by the time we got there, I'd kind of planned it so that it would be in the afternoon and we could walk up to the rim. There's a little stone guardrail, if you will, at the end of Desert View, which is at the very eastern end of the south rim of the Grand Canyon. And we walk up to the rim and we're all standing there, and it is a beautiful afternoon, and one of the little boys comes up behind me, all of us, and he goes, "Where are the balls? Where are the balls?" And I thought, he's really saying, "Where are the balls?" I looked at him, I said, "Jason, what do you mean, where are all the balls?" And he said, "Yeah, you kept saying the Grand Canyon. Where's all the balls?" And all of us just shook our head. I couldn't believe it. He had really had in his mind a totally different vision of the Grand Canyon. And it really hit home with me because I know oftentimes when we go to places, we do the same thing. Now, it might not be that big of a difference. We kind of know it's a canyon. But in the end, I think we carry with us a lot of baggage in our head, pre-visuals of what we've seen, things we've heard about. Nowadays, it's changed a little bit because we have the internet. We can research places and see different things through pictures that other people have taken. But a lot of times, our perception of a place is totally different than what it really is. And speaking of that, a little bit of background on me. I haven't been to Munch Butte yet, and I still have yet to find it. But this was taken by my grandfather and apparently named after him. If you don't know, my grandfather was a landscape photographer. He came over from Germany back in the 30s and then ended up coming through Ellis Island. He went up to Detroit, got a job, ended up getting some money, took a roadster around the country, and in his process, he found a couple places he really loved. One was Santa Barbara, which is where I live, and the other was Monument Valley. And I thank him, even though he's not around anymore, for having found Santa Barbara, because that's where I still live and raised my children. But he also fell in love with Monument Valley, and he ended up liking it so much, he went back there time and time again and started working for Arizona Highways Magazine, and then with that inspiration, he fell in love with the place even more, and the people that were there. These are the Navajo Indians. If you haven't been to Monument Valley, they're pretty much the locals there. And he went around with them for years and would spend months, from the stories I've heard, out in Monument Valley, documenting the places. A lot of these places now have little roads through them in the valleys, so it looks completely different. This is the Yebechai rocks, taken just up in them where you have to walk. And this, I think, is taken up in Canyon de Chelly, one of the places he also visited. This is how they got around then. There was no Jeeps or trucks. So it's a little different looking at these older pictures because you can't evaluate them from the point of view of today's landscape pictures with all the color and the beautiful sunsets maybe, or sunrises or pink skies. But what's amazing to me is that how different they are and how much things have changed. And so just remember that when you're out taking pictures of some of the different things. This is one of my favorites of his. These two Navajo women walking up the wash in Canyon de Chelly. Just a little moment in history. And then his pictures went viral, if they could, back in the day. One of the locals there near Monument Valley who settled the place decided that he should take these pictures and bring them to Hollywood, so that's what he did. And he showed them to John Ford, who ended up bringing all the movies out in Hollywood to Monument Valley. So that's why we see all the John Wayne movies out in Monument Valley. Nowadays, it looks a little different. You can see John Ford point this way. This is what you will see if you go today, maybe not the guy's head. But these things are maybe not so dramatic, and the reason I want to show them to you is that to get across a point that, really a lot of this that we do as photographers, not just landscape photographers though, is to tell a story. And what people really want to hear outside of maybe your family is your story, because you've done something that nobody else has. And even though you might not think it's that important, some of these smaller things that you've done that you think are small are actually interesting, especially years later. That's when your kids or your grandkids find these pictures and they'll, of course, love to see them. So you are also the new journalist. Journalism is one of those occupations that's on the chopping block. I don't think we'll have journalists, the true journalists, around that long. Apparently that's what everybody says in the media, and it seems that way because, as you know, many of the journalistic photographers have been laid off. They just aren't, there's not the work for them. So nowadays, if you start a blog and you're honest with people, you can be a journalist. Take it seriously, give them good information, and make sure that you record it accurately, of course. This is one of the pages out of a register that was from an expedition that my grandfather and my grandmother and my father were on back many years ago down the Colorado River before it was dammed at Lake Powell. And they had hiked up to a place called Flying Eagle Arch. And that arch is one of the spectacles you can hike up to still today. The logbook is no longer there, and so they preserved this page from showing the expedition. I love the little illustration. But all this is what really matters. Like I said, it's going to matter to more people later on, especially your kids and their kids. And this is my sister. She's sitting on the edge of Uncompahgre, which is a 14,000-foot mountain in Colorado. It was the first 14er that we had gone up. At the time, I think she was about 9. That would make me about 7. And all I remember of this particular trip was the hail hitting me on the head, because it was a hailstorm, and I thought I would not make it. But here I am today. Anyways, it matters because I know my sister remembers this moment, not just because of the picture, but because of the amazing time. And I'll say it 1,000 times, I think it's worth showing other people, especially your kids. And I know my son would kill me if he saw this, but the audio on this is he's singing, I won't try to do it, but essentially he's singing, remember the song that went viral, Maya-hee, Maya-ho, or something like that, and he's singing away and he's having a good time. There we go. He's definitely going to kill me. And that's what these places bring out in people, and not just kids, but everybody, adults, and I'll show you more pictures later. This is our time to connect with these places And if we don't do it for ourselves and we just show our kids, then at least we're going to show somebody what these places mean. Who's going to know how tall the mountains are, how clear the lakes are? You know, if the kids don't get involved and see what there is out there, then really what ends up with the environment is it kind of just becomes resources. So that's your job as photographers. You get to capture these amazing places and show them to all the other people. But while you're doing that, I just remind you, bring some other friends along. And in the process, you're going to go through this stage of, just like you do everything else in life, I guess, you start out as a beginner, and then you have the internship, and then you become the master or the artist. And just obviously in photography, you're going to learn some of the camera techniques. You're going to study, and you're going to learn all about all the settings on your camera, and I'm going to go through some of that, as I've mentioned. And then, of course, in the internship, you're going to end up getting experience, valuable experience, and then you're going to emulate and imitate. And that's the stage where you really have to go see what somebody else has done and go to that place and try to imitate it. But then at the end of all that, whether you do it in a certain order or not, the whole idea is that you go out and you create something unique. And I think this is one of the key elements of what I want to get across, is that in the process of photography, you're going to find something that I'm going to say again is something unique about you that you want to share through the landscape. For me, that process started with skiing. Believe it or not, I'd been out in the landscape and my parents had brought me to all these great places, but nothing really connected with me until I skied powder. So that was kind of the beginning of my connection with the outdoors and how I became fond of going to these places. Even in the cold, it's what led me to snow camping. And then as time went on, I realized that it wasn't just about the action and the adrenaline of skiing. It was about the environment. And so my work changed a little bit, and I wanted to include more of those areas that showed the pristine wildlife and pristine wilderness. And then it got to the point where it was pretty much just the wilderness, and me included, some cases. So really, we're inspired by, in my case, my grandfather, who went to Havasu. This is Havasu Falls. And then because of his experience there, he shared it with my father, and then my father passed it on to me, so that's why I'm a third-generation landscape photographer. And this shot next is one I took just a couple years ago with my son, and he was holding the flashlight at night, so I'm trying to train him. Right now he's in finance, though, but I think all of my children, I have 3 children, I think they're all inspired by what they've seen so far in the places I've taken them. So it's a great way to bond with your kids.